First and second and Peter, Galatians and for the longest, he was in the name of the book. Yes, the Old Testament has 39, so it beats the new one. What book in the Old Testament? You had your hand already. Keep you last night. Psalms. Does anyone know how many Psalms there are in it? Bunch of them, right? How many? You'll look right here. 150. You're right. You got it. You didn't have to look it up and count them all. I've got that joy, down in my heart. Way down in my heart. Way down in my heart. I've got that joy, down in my heart. Way down in my heart to stay. And I'm so happy, so very happy. I've got the love of Jesus in my heart, down in my heart, and I'm so happy, so very happy. I've got the love of Jesus in my heart. I've got the peace that passes understanding down in my heart. Where? Down in my heart. Where? Down in my heart. I've got the peace that passes understanding down in my heart. Where? Down in my heart to stay. And I'm so happy, so very happy. I've got the love of Jesus in my heart, down in my heart. And I'm so happy, so very happy. I've got the love of Jesus in my heart. And if the devil doesn't like it, he can sit on attack. Sit on attack. Sit on attack. And if the devil doesn't like it, he can sit on attack. Sit on attack to stay. And I'm so happy, so very happy. I've got the love of Jesus in my heart, down in my heart, and I'm so happy, so very happy. I've got the love of Jesus in my heart. All right, boys, just the boys stand up. Let's see what the ratio again is. I think you're still out of number. No, just the boys. Some of you aren't always. All right, okay. You know that you sing the latter part. You sit down. Once there were 3 wandering Jews. Once there were 3 wandering Jews. Wandering Jews. Wandering Jews. Once there were 3 wandering Jews. First one's name was Abraham. First one's name was Abraham. First one's name was Abraham. Second one's name was Isaac. So the second one's not Jacob. How do you know it's not? You're right. I just think if you're paying attention, just singing. Second one's name was Isaac. Second one's name was Isaac. 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 Second one's name was Isaac. Third one's name was Jacob. Third one's name was Jacob. Third one's name was Jacob. All went down to Canaan's land. All went down to Canaan's land. Land. All went down to Canaan's land. Boys, you have to work on something. Very
go out in order so that we can make sure that everyone gets to their class on time. Any of the teachers need the latest and up to date. May change again tomorrow, but you need to know as far as the schedule. Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones live in me long, they are weak, but He is strong. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so. All right, 2 and 3 year olds, nursery school. We got 3 more students for the team. I think one's still open with the other one. So, what is this for?
I'm going to try standing. Not many people.
We're hurting. Come on. Brother Larry has our lessons tonight. The elders here at the congregation. We're blessed to have him teach tonight.
Good evening, everyone. Jim Hammonds did 2 lessons last night. I've got 2 tonight. And I'm always long-winded, so I know I'm not going to get through everything. I'll just have to skip over a little bit. But this week we've been talking about trees and the Bible and lessons from those trees. Just as a matter of curiosity, can anybody tell me, according to the database, you know there's a database for everything these days. According to the database, can you tell me how many species of trees there are in the world? Would it surprise you if I said over 10,000? Would it surprise you if I said over 50,000? Well, according to the database, there's 60,065. The reason I bring that up, when I get to my other lesson, I've got a question about that, but I'm going to go ahead and do it. The way they classify trees and by species, if you look at botany, what they do is, if we start at the very bottom, that's the species, and then the genus, and then it keeps working its way up till we get to. So, for instance, in an oak is in a genus, and then it has species below that. In the state of Alabama, there are there's about 21 species of oak trees. Now, we can all look out there and see what an oak is, but can you identify it down to its species? I love wood, by the way. I work in wood some. When I was growing up, when I was about that tall, and I used to be little, When I was about that big, one of the cousins that I hung around with most used to call me knothead. And I thought that was a term of endearment, that we was around wood and the knots in the wood and all like that. It was only when I got in the second grade I found out knothead meant dim-witted. So I still look at it as a term of endearment from him. Tonight we're going to start with the almond tree. I have access to 110 different woods right now.
Larry makes peanuts. Why I brought it up, and these are all different kinds of wood.
And I love working with the knot. They call them burls these days, but the knots make pretty wood. The almond tree, it's native to Syria and that region over there. And if you've never seen an almond tree in bloom, it is a very beautiful tree. The blooms come out before the leaves, which makes it a little bit unusual. And what Brother Terry did, he looked at wood, the almond as wood of authority. And that's where we're going to start and what we're going to look at. Jeremiah 1, verses 11 through 12. Jeremiah 1, verse 11 and 12. It says, Moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Jeremiah, what seest thou? And I said, I see a rod of an almond tree. Then said the Lord unto me, Thou hast well seen, for I will hasten my word to perform it. Let's break that verse down in a little bit. Start with, I see a rod of an almond tree. Now, depending on which version of the Bible you use, it will either be rod or an almond branch. The Hebrew dictionary defines rod as a shoot or something that has leaves on it, or no leaves and used as a walking stick or a divining rod or a guiding rod or something like that. So in context here, I believe rod works better because we're going to find out that it has to do with some guiding and some such that. Then we look at the name almond. And almond in the Hebrew denotes the waking tree or the waking fruit. It's also translated to watch because it blossoms so early. Most of the time it blossoms about February, sometimes in January. And you say, well, that's nothing special because of the climate changes around the world and all. But does anybody know where Jerusalem is, the latitude of Jerusalem, if you had the round globe and going around? Just a little south of Montgomery. Montgomery is about the 32nd latitude, 32 point, and Jerusalem is 31 point something. So just a little south of Montgomery. So the weather in that region is very similar to what South Alabama would be like. And so that tree blossoms then in February. Now, what we had read there in verse 11 and 12 was where Jeremiah had made a statement. God had asked him something. But if you put it all in context, and if you look at the two verses right before that, God had given them a warning. He said, Then the Lord put forth his hand and touched my mouth, and the Lord said unto me, Behold, I have put my words in thy mouth. See, I have this day set thee over the nations and over the kingdoms to root out and to pull down and to plant and destroy and to throw down, to build up and to plant. Then after the verses that we just read about what Jeremiah saw, God shows him a boiling pot over Jerusalem, which basically is calamity. And it says, And the word of the Lord came unto me the second time, saying, What seest thou? And I said, I see a seething pot, and the face thereof is toward the north. Then the Lord said unto me, Out of the north an evil shall break forth upon all the inhabitants of the land. The closing comment in verse 12 is, I will hasten to perform it. And that is God talking. Now, if we leave Jeremiah and go back and look at Moses, if we go back into Numbers chapter 17, we're going to read verses 1 through 7 and then make some comments about them. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and take of every one of them a rod according to the house of their fathers. Of all their princes, according to the house of their fathers, 12 rods. Write thou every man's name upon his rod, and thou shalt write Aaron's name upon the rod of Levi. For one rod shall be for the head of the house of their fathers. And thou shalt lay them up in the tabernacle of the congregation before the testimony, where I will meet with you. And it shall come to pass that the man's rod, whom I have chose, shall blossom, and I will make to cease from me the murmurings of the children of Israel, whereby they murmur against you. And Moses spake unto the children of Israel, and every one of them of their princes gave him a rod apiece, for each prince one according to their father's house, even 12 rods, and the rod of Aaron was among their rods. And Moses laid up the rods before the Lord in the tabernacle of witness. Now, who can tell me why this is being done? If we go back into the previous chapter, chapter 16, we learn that there had been a little disruption going on. One that had to take care of Korah, who had rose up against Moses, and they did away with him and his followers. And there's still some things that are unsettled there. So God has said to Moses, we're going to do this, and the one that we pick out, that's going to be the one you follow. And that's going to be the rod of authority. And that's the reason I did it that way. Because when we look at verse 8 then, it says, And it came to pass that on the morrow Moses went into the tabernacle of witness, and behold, the rod of Aaron for the house of Levi was budded, and brought forth buds, and bloomed blossoms, and yielded almonds. So apparently, Moses had a staff of almond wood. What makes this, a miracle for one thing, but how many of you deal with any kind of plant or any kind of vegetation? If you take a piece of wood and cut it off a tree, let's do it this way. An azalea bush. If you rip an azalea bush up out of the ground and throw it on concrete where it has no access to water or nutrients of any kind, what's going to happen to that azalea bush? It's going to die. Now, what happens if you rip that azalea bush up out of the ground and then just lay it back on the ground and don't move it anywhere? The roots are going to start finding their way to something, and it's going to start budding. It's going to start growing because it still has access. Here, Moses' staff, which generally the staff is looked at as a staff of authority. All the leaders would carry one to show their position. So here, Moses has a dead stick that they put before the ark of the testimony, or before the testimony in the ark, and all of a sudden, it came back to life. It budded and it bloomed almonds. Basically, it's a symbol of a resurrected priest if you go back into Jewish history and look at it. In Hebrews chapter 5 and verse 4, it says, And no man taketh this honor unto himself, but he that is called of God. And that was Aaron. Would that stick have done anything if God had not wanted something done to that stick? Nope. So he's the one that chose what to do. I don't know if we have time to really get into it or not, but anybody know what a menorah is? That's that candlestick, candelabra type thing. And it was made out of gold, and the bowls on the top were fashioned like almonds. To the Jews, the menorah is considered the tree of life. just to try to tie a few things together there. And who chose how it was going to be decorated? Who gave them the instructions on how to make it and decorate it? God. If we look at Exodus 25, that will go into a little bit more detail on it. 6 branches shall come out of the sides of it, 3 branches of the candlestick out of the one side, and 3 branches of the candlestick out of the other. 3 bowls made like unto almonds, with a knot and a flower in one branch, and 3 bowls made like almonds in the other branch, with a knot and a flower. So in the 6 branches that come out of the candlestick, and in the candlestick shall be 4 bowls made like unto almonds, with their knops and their flowers. So at the top of each of those 7 branches was set an oil lamp. And like I said, the lampstand was considered the tree of life, and it was the only light in the holy place. Now, when we get into the next section dealing with the acacia wood, we're going to talk a little bit about the holy, the most holy, and things of that nature. But for right now, just take that it's in that place. In Numbers 17 and 10, and the Lord said unto Moses, bring Aaron's rod again before the testimony, to be kept for a token against the rebels, and thou shalt take away their murmurings from me, that they die not. Now again, this crosses over into acacia a little bit, and I'm going to go ahead and cover some of that, and I hope I don't double up on it. But here where it said that they took Aaron's rod and put it before the testimony. The testimony, we will find out in the next section, was placed in the ark. And the ark was placed in the most holy place. There are some who want to say that staff was placed in the ark before the testimony or before the tablets. But I want you to use some common sense for just a moment. What did we say the staff or the rod was used for? It was a symbol of authority, a symbol of power. So how long would a staff be for them? If they're going to reach out and guide sheep or reach out and do anything, it's going to be you see the images of them where they walk around holding them like so. They're at least as tall as they are. Anybody remember the dimensions of the Ark of the Covenant? The length of it? 2.5 cubits. How long is a cubit? 18 inches, or from arm, fingertip to elbow, about 18 inches. 2.5 of those makes approximately 3 feet and 3/4 of another, so about 3 feet 9. Does that sound like a staff would fit in it? Not hardly. So personally, I believe that what they meant was that placing it before the testimony is you had the ark there, and then they placed it in front of. Because what else significant happened at the Ark of the Covenant? What's on top of it? The mercy seat. And where did God come to talk to them and meet with them? At the mercy seat. So, and then before they see that, there's that veil that separates the holy from the most holy. Just an opinion, something for you to think about. But in 1 Kings 8 and verse 9, it says, there was nothing in the ark save the 2 tables of stone which Moses put there at Horeb when the Lord made a covenant with the children of Israel when they came out of Egypt. And if you look at Hebrews 9 and 4, it says, which had the golden censer and the ark of the covenant overlaid round about with gold, wherein was the golden pot that had manna, and Aaron's rod that budded, and the tables of the covenant. So as we go through the history part here, initially there was just the ark, the testimony or the tablets, stone tablets in there. By the time we get to Kings, that's the only thing there. And then when the writers of Hebrew looks back, there could have been some other stuff at one time in there, but as much as it was moved around, some of it could have gotten lost. If we also look back then at Genesis 43 and verse 11, 43 and 11, and their father Israel said unto them, if it must be so now, do this, take of the best fruits in the land in your vessel, and carry down the man a present, a little balm and a little honey, spices and myrrh, nuts, and almonds. To set the stage again for you here, Joseph had been in Egypt. There was a famine in the land. Israel had sent his sons down to Egypt to get food for them to live on. They're not going to make a second trip unless they're going to be able to take their youngest son with them. Israel is holding out on it, but things are getting kind of desperate. So he says, okay, if you got to go back, take these things as a gift to the governor. Take these as a gift to the man. And look what he called them. Take the best fruits of the land in your vessel. And that included almonds. Why would you take a gift to someone in power that way? Now, if you've been in some of my classes before, we've talked about it. In that region of the world, it was customary to, if you're going to go to somebody that is of higher standing than you take them something. But why would Israel send after food in Egypt and take some of the best that he had to give to him instead of just some other gift? To honor him. And what is the topic of our lesson tonight? Almond tree, but almond tree is of what? So he's given to the man of authority and trying to make him real happy. It's generally allowed that the almonds of that region were some of the best in the world, so it was very acceptable then to be a gift to the governor. What time did the bell ring? Oh, I got 5 minutes. So the lesson of the almond tree, therefore, is that God in heaven watches a sinful nation walking away from him and declares it will have consequences. His message to humanity is still the same. God is watching. He will watch over his word, either for curse or for blessing. And when sin and immorality engulf nations and even penetrate the church, we should remember that God is watching. He's always watching. And even with this strong warning that was given to him back in Jeremiah, and then the comments that asked him Jeremiah what he saw, the almond carries with it a lot of encouragement. If we drop all the way down to Jeremiah chapter 31 and verse 28, it says, and it shall come to pass that like as I have watched over them to pluck up and to break down and to throw down and to destroy and to afflict, so I will watch over them to build and to plant, saith the Lord. So if we decide to consecrate our lives to God, then he has promised to watch over us for good, even with our weaknesses and our frailties. His eyes are always upon us. And I think that's the main message that we need to take away from that God has always got his eye on us. We might fool our neighbor, but we're not going to fool God. So if we were offering an invitation tonight, it would be very simply this. Are you being watchful of your life and behavior so you do not drift from closeness with God? Are you watching and praying so you do not fall into temptation? Got through that. Questions or comments now? Finish so we can just have a chat about it. Any questions, comments at all on almond trees or the almond wood or authority?
I like the part made where the wood, the plant, a little bit from concrete, but for the weight on the soil, that would die. I think the application for other Christians is that we always need to look to God's word, and God's word should be our guide. It should be covered. And as Christians, if we remove ourselves from that, we take ourselves away from that food not the reason, you know, we might say that, you know, we might just do bad now and make up for it later, but as Christians, we always have to try and get that nourishment from what we live our lives. Because as you said, God, He's all, knows everything. And he has a final, will get the final say. After everything is said and done, after all the murmuring and so forth, like, so, Moses, we're going to have nothing. God has a final will. So, each and every person needs to make their calling election for their own self.
And I've used this example many times before, but I also think it very appropriate here that our mind is like a sponge. And how does a sponge operate? If you take a dry sponge and keep it dry, what's it going to do? Nothing. When you put that sponge in water, what does it do? Fills up to capacity if you got enough water in there. What happens if you take that sponge out of the water? It starts shrinking. What happens to our mind if we are keeping it focused on the Bible and focused on God? If we are studying, what is happening? We're growing. What happens if we leave the Bible on the coffee table for a month and don't touch it? How quickly do we forget? So you're never, just like a sponge. Well, the sponge is static if it's in enough water. But our minds, we are always expanding or we're shrinking. We're never status quo. So we need to stay in touch with what's going to help us keep growing and the things that help us keep growing the correct way. Which I know it wasn't my lesson. Terry covered it Sunday night, but if you look at the evergreen tree, where was the evergreen tree planted? Next to water, had a food source, so it was always green and growing. If we look at water for the tree as food, where do we get our food if we're the tree and the water? We go into the book of Revelation, where does it tell us that the water comes from? The water of life comes from the throne of God. So if we stay close to that source, then we've got life. Any other good comment? Any other comment? Yes, sir, Brother Harbaugh.
Jim mentioned John chapter 15 as well. Says, I am the vine. Like tree, water, fishing for the word of God. So if we don't draw from the source, Jesus, with all power, all authority, we're not going to be able to do much.
That is correct. Brother Clarence just said they didn't learn from Korah. How many people died along with Korah? 200 and something it was. Fell into the pit and was buried. Seemed like that should have gotten their attention, but it didn't. So if we just look at the almond tree or the almond wood as the authority because of the budding and the places it's been, I think that's a good lesson that we learn. And one other question for you. I told you how many species of trees there were. Can anybody tell me how many species are named by name in the Bible? 16. You don't think about it, but if you just think about some of the things that you've read, blank of Lebanon, cedars. You talked about gopher wood, the ark. Who was it that crawled up into a tree to see God? Sycamore tree. So you can see it as it goes along there. The bell rang. So y'all just want to go into the next one, and if we finish early, we finish and have a little break. The next section deals with the acacia, and like I said, there's going to be some overlap between the two, so I hope I don't repeat too much. Acacia is mentioned in reference to objects used in the construction of the tabernacle and in the Ark of the Covenant. And when we look at the acacia, Brother Clonchett's got it down, wood of worship. Wood of worship. Why would acacia tree or the acacia wood be the chosen wood for those items? Does it have any significance to it? Who told them to use it? Who gave them directions? God. If you remember last night, if you was here last night with Brother Jim Hammond spoke of Noah and Noah's Ark, it being made out of gopher wood. He said that we don't know what gopher wood is or was. For some reason, the words translated into gopher wood didn't carry down to us today, so we can't really point out what kind of wood it was. But why did God tell Noah to use gopher wood? And why did God tell Moses to use acacia wood? And if we just think about it reasonably, it would be the one that made sense to use at that time. Why? Let me rephrase that. Are there certain woods that boat builders of old, before the fiberglass and metals, did they use certain woods versus other wood? Absolutely. So God chose gopher wood because he didn't want it to warp, bow, twist, soak up enough water that it wouldn't float. So he made it where the ark, where it would be durable enough, because it was going to be in water for how long? Over a year if you put it all together, right? So it had to be that kind of wood. So why do we use acacia wood? If you look at it from the practical standpoint, acacia wood is a hardwood. It is dense. It resists decay. And also it resists insects. Insects don't like it. Can you think of an American wood that would be similar to acacia wood then? Well, they don't like cedar, but cedar is not quite as hard as cypress, is it? So cypress, cedar, even hard oak would be the same thing. So there's a lot of things in that category that would work. But God was picking out the wood for the occasion when he did it. If we look at Exodus chapter 25, starting in verse 24, Exodus 35 and verse 24. Everyone that did offer an offering of silver and brass brought the Lord's offering, and every man with whom was found shittim wood for any work of the service brought it. Thought we was going to be talking about acacia. Now I mentioned shittim. Remember I said we started with the species and genus, and well, acacia wood is a genus, and a species of acacia wood is shittim wood. So whatever translation or version you're using, if it either says shittim or acacia, they're both correct. The use of acacia wood made good sense at that time because it was readily available. It was, like we said, it was very durable, last a long time. How long did it have to last? How long did if acacia wood was used for the tabernacle, how long did the tabernacle last? Over 400 years. And then the Ark of the Covenant lasted then up until the destruction of Babylon later. Exodus 37, we're going to read several verses here. start with verse 1. Exodus 37, starting with verse 1. Well, at that time, acacia wood was the wood that would have been most available during their journeys, yeah. Well, we got to remember the wilderness 2,000 years ago. Yeah, just not populated. That's one of the tricky things when we start talking about things of this nature, because I said that Jerusalem was on a parallel just south of Montgomery. But if we go west out into Arizona, Arizona is a desert, isn't it? But you find petrified wood out there. At one time, it wasn't a desert. We go north to Grant, just north of Gunnersville, to Cathedral Caverns. And there's a shark's tooth hanging out of one of the chambers there. I've never known a shark to be a land dweller. They've always been in the water. So at one time, North Alabama was underwater. So if you look at the cycles of weather and the cycles of nature, things move around. But at that particular time, the way they were traveling and all that would have been the available wood for them. Right. Like Brother Terry said, a lot of times wilderness to them just meant that it was away from a populated area, away from the city. Deep in the woods, yeah. Yes, ma'am. We're going to leave that one alone. We're not even going to repeat that one. You want to repeat it louder? Okay. Verse 1, starting with verse 1 in chapter 37 of the Exodus. And Bezalel made the ark of shittim wood. 2 cubits and a half was the length of it, and 1 cubit and a half the breadth of it, and 1 cubit and a half the height of it. And he overlaid it with pure gold within and without, and made a crown of gold to it round about. And he cast for it 4 rings of gold to be set by the corners of it, even 2 rings upon one side of it and 2 rings on the other side of it. And he made staves of shittim wood and overlaid them with gold. And he put the staves into the rings by the sides of the ark to bear the ark. Now, the people were being commanded at this time to build a box. And on top of that box was going to be a mercy seat. There was going to be some decoration of cherubim. And that box was going to hold something very, very valuable. What was it going to hold? Let's see what it says. The very words of God were carved into stone, were to be placed in the ark. Now, in Deuteronomy 10 in verse 1 and 2, it calls those tablets of stone. At that time, the Lord said unto me, hew thee 2 tables of stone like unto the first, and come up unto me in the mount, and make thee an ark of wood, and I will write on the tablets of the words that were in the first tablets which thou breakest, and thou shalt put them in the ark. Remember the first time up the mountain and down, he got mad and threw and broke it? Now it's being replaced. And then in Exodus chapter 25 and verse 16, that same thing is called testimony. And thou shalt put into the ark the testimony which I shall give thee. Now this ark was to be placed in the most holy place in the tabernacle. Now, we're not going to go into all the dimensions and everything like that. We're just going to talk in broad terms. But the tabernacle, the tent, the area, it had sort of a common area. And then within that common area, there was an area that was called the holy place. And in the holy place, there was the candlestick, altar of incense, table of showbread. There was a veil. Behind the veil was considered the Holy of Holies, or the Most Holy, and the only thing that went in there was the Ark of the Covenant. And it says in verse chapter 26, Exodus 26, in verse 33, thou shalt hang up the veil under the thatches, that thou mayest bring in thither within the veil the ark of the testimony, and the veil shall divide you unto you between the holy place and the most holy place. So the most holy place then also contained the mercy seat. Everybody get a pretty good picture of what that is? And then the priest could only go in there how many times a year? One time a year, into the very center, the deepest area there. If we look at Leviticus chapter 16 and verse 2, the Lord said unto Moses, speaking to Aaron thy brother, that he will not come at all times into the holy place within the veil before the mercy seat, which is upon the ark, that he die not. For I will appear in the cloud upon the mercy seat. So you can start getting a picture here that was the sacred place, that when God came down to meet with him, only the high priest could go into that area to meet with him. So it is I guess you could say in essence, it's the focal point of worship. And since we're looking at acacia wood being the wood of worship, it sort of starts pulling it together there. Number 17, 1 through 3, we've already gone through this, but we need to go over it one more time. This is where they had that dispute, and they was going to settle the dispute with whose rod budded. And we're not going to read the whole thing again. I just want to pick up on some of the key verses there. Verse 1 through 3 tells us what they were to do and how it was to be done. And then in verse 4, number 17 and 4, says, thou shalt lay them up in the tabernacle of the congregation before the testimony, where I will meet with you. Now, the reason I'm pointing this one out is, remember in the previous section where we talked about where Aaron's rod was going to be, whether one of the commentaries, Barnes, says it was inside the Ark of the Covenant before the tables. And that's why I said that I didn't, using a little common sense, I don't think that fits. Well, in addition to common sense, if we look at verse 4 that said that they shall lay them up before the testimony, then in verse 8 of chapter 17, it says, and it came to pass that on the morrow Moses went into the tabernacle of witness, and behold, the rod of Aaron for the house of Levi was budded and brought forth buds and bloomed blossoms and yielded almonds. So here it is very distinct that where it's located, and it's not located inside the ark. Then in verse 10, 2 verses later, it says, and the Lord said unto Moses, bring Aaron's rod again before the testimony, to keep it for a token against the rebels, and thou shalt take away their murmurings from me, that they die not. So if he's going to take it again, where's he taking it? To a new place, or to where it had been? In my feeble mind, now remember, my cousin called me a knothead, but in my feeble way of looking at things, this verse here says that bring Aaron's rod again before the testimony. It meant to put it back in the same place it had been, or in that general area, and not in a new location. Does that make sense, or is there anybody want to discuss it, talk about it, throw rocks at me? Okay. Then what does it mean for Aaron's rod to be before the testimony, to be kept as a token? Why is it being kept as a token? Okay? It reminds them of the authority. So we need to, if we just go back real quick and look at it, why were they even making a selection of one rod over the rest of them? To settle a dispute and to figure out who was going to take the lead, right? In essence, who was the authority figure? Aaron's was the authority figure. When that was placed there as a token or as a totem or as a whatever you want to, however you want to look at it, it was placed in that location so that they would remember what took place and remember that that was the one of authority. So that's the way I look at it is we're looking at authority and it's in the place of authority. Questions or comments? Warning. That's a good word. Who was the only person allowed inside that room where the ark was kept? The high priest, once a year. So it doesn't make good sense for it to be there, does it? If you're going to use it as a reminder or as a token, it just doesn't make it. Now, yes, sir. I got two hands, Brother Harbaugh, and then I'm not going to nail it down to a specific date or an event, but I definitely think it was destroyed and is not to be around anymore. And the reason that I go that venue is we don't have any pieces of the cross. Why? We don't have any parts of the boat, Noah's Ark. Why? And that is because people would place it there and worship it instead of what we're supposed to worship, which this table says that we're to come together on the first day of the week to remember him till he comes again. So there's if you add it up, there is enough pieces of the cross that Christ was hung on and died to make about 3 or 4 crosses. So somebody that's got those relics, they're not the real thing. And I just don't believe that. And look at it this way also. Why did Christ never personally baptize anyone? He taught, but who did the baptisms? His disciples, his followers. Why was that? Do you remember the passage that says, I'm of Paul, I'm of Apollos? Because there would be that, they would try to set that hierarchy in. So if there were any remnants of anything left out there, people would gravitate to that and worship that. Sunday morning, I think it was that we went through our class on the Shroud of Turin. In the Bible, it tells us in 2 different locations that the burial clothes was the burial clothes and the napkin that went on the face. The Shroud of Turin is one piece of cloth that goes up the front and down the back. But how many people gravitate to that and want to hang on to it and place that Shroud of Turin, again, if you compare it to Bible, is an absolute falsity. But how many people gravitate to it and want to place great emphasis on it? Versus go to the Bible and read what the Bible says.
Any of those things could say would be art,
Yep.
but they've never ever shown up so that we can believe that God allowed everything to be destroyed that time, so that there would be worship of that. And of course, the destruction of Jerusalem was so complete, all the genealogy records and everything. So it was just a forevermore cutoff of that old law and everything.
Even set fire to the stone to get the gold out of it so they could take everything. Don't be messing now with my Indiana Jones movies. Yes, ma'am. Well, the Bible don't say that, but it makes good sense, don't it? Because nobody else could go in there without dying, so. Of course, I kind of think that if he was in there to see God, God would have tossed him out if that had been the case. But
This wood that's used for building this furniture, and tabernacle property itself, I mean, that connects. Just from a physical standpoint, but then through the New Testament, bring part of that out of it. All the spiritual life as well. Too much completely no matter what kind of shoes have, building that we
that is correct. But they certainly went into a great detail about exactly how it was to be done. And if it is done any other way, you think they would have managed as well? Brother Joel? Yes, sir.
Thinking about it from a modern-day perspective, as Christians, this would sound like it was made to last. And I think as Christians, we are often outnumbered in this world, you know, we are outnumbered by people, forces of people, and whatnot. And our worship has to last, has to withstand everything that the devil, the wiles of the devil, everything throws at us. And Jesus Christ is the ultimate authority, and as Christians, we need to always worship Christ and follow that rule that he set for us. And no matter how many times the devil knocks us down, we have to get right back up and keep worshiping him. I think that's what Jesus looks at. He doesn't look at people who just come to church on a Sunday and sit down and hear his lesson and go back home and that's it. He wants living sacrifice. He wants people that weather storms of his life and weather affliction and tribulation and still worship him in the midst of all that. You know? Our worship is the last. That's the point.
And if we want to do some comparing, like Brother Terry was, old to new, if we go back to the tabernacle, and it was built of acacia wood, that being the durable wood and all, where was the focal point of worship? Tabernacle. And then inside the Holy of Holies for the high priest. Bringing that to today with us, where should our focal point be?
still holy, but Jesus. Holy.
And today we use softwood instead of acacia wood. I still prefer real paper made out of wood instead of electronics. But if we stay close to this, as the priest stayed close to God, then we'll have it together. Yes.
You know, one of the good things to show the difference between, there's a lot of difference between the Old and New Testament. But they were told to worship in all specific. But if you think back about where their center of worship was the children of Israel, tabernacle, the temple, Jerusalem. That was the center of God's people and his world was that area. So the wood could be things to be specific within God's ultimate wisdom for the New Testament church that was to be worldwide. So there was no just the Middle East, just that area, just Jerusalem, get the wood there, everybody could be obedient because it was available. Because he couldn't have said in New Testament worship, your plates for communion would have to be out of acacia or olive wood. You know, your pulpit, although that's not even mentioned at all, but I'm saying if it were, would have to be made out of a certain thing. Because then you go to certain islands, certain nations, certain places, sometimes they don't have that kind of. So that would have been a respected person.
Right.
It wouldn't have been the availability there. So in his wisdom, one of the things
that's one of the reasons we have that, some of that liberty. Because back then, it could be more localized because that was God's people in that region. And maybe a little bit spread out, but not as much. But nowadays, it's worldwide. So that's, when people get something about what is Christian liberty, what is that liberty that we have? Not that we can worship any way we want or do anything we want. But it's in certain of the things that we, yeah, it's that general authority.
Yep. And also, God never told anybody to do anything that they physically couldn't do. So and just like with your lesson, where did Noah get all his wood? I don't know. It was available, wasn't it? Well, you know one of my favorite verses in the Bible, so to some people this is going to be a stretch, but to others I don't think it will. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is Ezra 7:10. Ezra 7 verse 10. It says when Ezra was going out, I'm paraphrasing it now for you, but when Ezra was going out to seek the law and to do it, before he did that, he prepared his heart. Now, the reason I bring that in at this point is that as we were talking about this wood, when they made those items, they nowhere in the Bible will it tell you they did it this way. But I'm using what I would consider just some reasoning. Where do you get your best wood in a tree? And what's it called? Heartwood. You don't want the very outside because that's the sapwood. That's where it's soft and that's where all the nutrients flow. But is it the closer you get to the center, as it gets in the center, that's where the tree literally dies, and it's very hard. So the heartwood in building the Ark of the Testimony and all, to me, it goes back to the heart, and you can make a connection with that we are to prepare our heart so that we can study and do what we're supposed to do. Thank y'all so much for your comments and your attention.
I like it. I done my leg across the whole class. Yeah, I don't think it's gonna work.
Congratulations. B-I-B-L-E. That's the book for me. I stand by faith on the word of God. B-I-B-L-E. B-I-B-L-E. Yes, that's the book for me. I stand by faith on the word of God. B-I-B-L-E. I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery. I may never fly over the enemy, but I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir! I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir! I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir! I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery. I may never fly over the enemy, but I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir! I'm a former fighting soldier on the battlefield. I'm a former fighting soldier on the battlefield. I'm a fighting soldier on the battlefield. Keep on bringing souls to Jesus by the service that I give. I got a helmet on my head, in my hands a sword and shield. I got a helmet on my head, in my hands a sword and shield. I got a helmet on my head, in my hands a sword and shield. Keep on bringing souls to Jesus by the service that I give. I'm gonna walk right and talk right and sing right and pray right on the battlefield. I'm gonna walk right and talk right and sing right and pray right on the battlefield. I'm gonna walk right and talk right and sing right and pray right on the battlefield. Keep on bringing souls to Jesus by the service that I give. When I die, let me die in the service of my Lord. When I die, let me die in the service of my Lord. When I die, let me die in the service of my Lord. Keep on bringing souls to Jesus by the service Nothing but joy in that land, nothing but joy in that land, nothing but joy in that land, where I'm bound. Nothing but joy in that land, nothing but joy in that land, nothing but joy in that land, where I'm bound. I've got a Savior in that land. I've got a Savior in that land. I've got a Savior in that land. Where I'm bound, where I'm bound. I've got a Savior in that land. I've got a Savior in that land. I've got a Savior in that land. Where I'm bound. Don't you want to go to that land? Don't you want to go to that land? Don't you want to go to that land? Where I'm bound, where I'm bound. Don't you want to go to that land? Don't you want to go to that land? Don't you want to go to that land? Where I'm bound. You know what's the fun part? Reckon you're singing? It's see all of your faces and smiles. I can hear all of your singing. It sounds so pretty. Sing out. Be happy about it. Sing. Study God's word. Just a moment, we'll go downstairs. What 2 words don't you tell people that are serving you? Thank you. Let me sound Jesus. Oh. You put anything down? No. You bring anything? No. You have a reason to be thankful? Yes. Even when you're at home, you don't feel mom and dad thank you too. You got a place to live. You got food to eat. You got clothes to wear. Mom and dad made that possible for you. Okay? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Acts, and the Romans, First and Second Corinthians, Galatians and Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, First and Second Thessalonians, First and Second Timothy, Titus and Philemon, Hebrews, James, First and Second Peter, First and Second and Third John, Jude and Revelation. I want to give you a challenge about the books of the Bible. Before I challenge you, and I haven't got any names yet about the people who can say all the New Testament, all the Old Testament, or all of them together yet. So if you can say that, let me know. So we won't let you be recognized, be smart enough to memorize. We'll even let you see, if you're young enough, you can sing through the New Testament. There's a song also for the Old Testament, but it's a little bit harder to keep up with. My challenge is to you, see if you can say the books of the Bible backwards. Okay? If you won't see it done, come see me later. I'll show you. Okay? All right? Books, Bible backwards. All right? Okay. Just a second, we're going to have a prayer go downstairs. Okay? Back here, we listen to prayer just a moment. I said one thing that makes it so good to hear you and see is to see your smiling faces and everything. I'm blessed. I got my beautiful wife. I've got sons running around somewhere. I've got grandsons and I've got a granddaughter. We've got neighbors. It's such a blessing to see all the smiling faces wanting to learn about God's Word. Don't ever stop learning about God's Word. But even when you get old like me, you'll learn from the Bible. Not just learning the books, but learning what's in them. We'll have this song and then we're going to have our prayer, okay? Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. For the Father up above is looking down in love. So be careful, little eyes, what you see. Oh, be careful, little ears, what you hear. Oh, be careful, little ears, what you hear. For the Father up above is looking down in love. So be careful, little ears, what you hear. Oh, be careful, little mouth, what you say. Oh, be careful, little mouth, what you say. For the Father up above is looking down in love. So be careful, little mouth, what you say. Oh, be careful, little hands, what you do. Oh, be careful, little hands, what you do. For the Father up above is looking down in love. So be careful, little hands, what you do. Be careful, little feet, where you go. Oh, be careful, little feet, where you go. For the Father up above is looking down in love. So be careful, little feet, where you go. Well, I want you, just the kids, to do something for me, okay? Because there's some people in here that I hope that you're also thankful for. When all the kids say with me, thank you because of your Bible classes. Okay? You had different ones throughout the night, so on count of three, say thank you to them, okay? 1, 2, 3. Thank you! Now it's time to listen, okay? So Jerry just wants to say a prayer to be thanks to you.
Let's pray. Dear God, we thank you so much that we have this time tonight to come here, to be with our friends, to be with our family, to be with our neighbors, and to learn more about your will for us. God, we thank you for your love for us. We thank you for the Bible that tells us what you want us to do, and it tells us that we can get to heaven. We thank you for Jesus and his love for us and his sacrifice on the cross. Father, go with us now as we go downstairs. Bless the food to our bodies to your service. Help us to have safe trips home and to always try to be more like Jesus and less like the world. And to show your love to everybody around us. It's all these things we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Be a rooster, don't be grouchy like a rooster. Be a rooster, and good start Bible school. I don't know what grouchy rooster is, but I think it's quiet. All right, so start here with our little ones that have moms and dads. Need some help getting downstairs. Let me read. Go slow and don't run over them, okay? Any adults that have little things that need to go. This stuff was me. This stuff. This stuff. All we need to do is learning. We're going to grow up. Already grow up. Be good, serving God. Be a Christian that's going to live this way you can go to heaven. All right, we'll let this big girl go and then don't leave big birds. Oh no, no, it's so slow. all right. There's enough, Mike. Go ahead. You need some wood, Senior? Most of it's cedar. This piece is not, this is quite a time. It's a lot of stuff. I ran out of cedar. I didn't realize I was missing one grade.
What you gonna do with the cedar when you're done? I'll take out the answer. I can't turn it and make it doors.